Welcome to the Legion Strength and Conditioning Podcast. You can check us out at legionsc.com or follow us on Instagram at legion.sc. So when thinking about pacing, a lot of people have a few strategies that they approach workouts with. One is to just kind of do a round at a moderate pace, whether it's an AMRAP or a multiple rounds for time type of situation, and then sort of look at the clock after their first round and gauge how they feel and decide whether they want to try to go faster or if that was too fast or if they should just try to maintain. And the other strategy that people have is that they will have someone who is potentially, another athlete at their affiliate or whatever, and they'll pace off of them. So they'll either try to go a little bit faster or the same as, or maybe a round slower than someone who they know is about the same level as them. And they'll just kind of look at that athlete's score on the leaderboard or whatever the workout tracking app of choice is and gauge based upon that. And not that these are necessarily bad strategies, right? There can be some value in just sort of doing a round, gauging the feel and adjusting based upon that. And it's also pretty relevant to have an idea of where you sit in terms of your capabilities and to attempt to, work at the same rate as someone who's about the same level as you. Great ideas. But it's also really important to have an idea of how to calculate on your own based upon what the actual movements are and how many repetitions you have to do, what a round, quote unquote, should take you in a specific workout, right? So what we're talking about here is doing actual rep math based upon, okay, if we have to do this many wall balls, this much rowing, and these many muscle ups, like in that one open workout, like how much time would it take to just do the work? And then how much time can you expect to be spending in transition? And how much time can you expect to be spending resting based upon your abilities relative to those movements? And then from that, you can actually do a little bit of math, figure out what a round should take you, and then potentially use that information along with some of the other information of other people's scores or how your first round feels to adjust. But just kind of guessing based upon other people's efforts and not necessarily having an idea of what your own capacity should be on something, I think is a mistake. And it's pretty important. It's a pretty important skill for anyone trying to learn how to pace, to actually just like do some quick mental math on the repetitions and figure it out. So John, how do you think about doing this type of mental math? I mean, either for yourself or, you big exerciser, just training all the time. Or when, honestly, when designing workouts for athletes, because that's a big part of effective program design as well.
Yeah, I think the 20.5 open workout was a good example of how strategizing rep schemes and knowing what kind of rep paces you can hold made a big difference. For those of you who don't know, the workout was 40 ring muscle ups, 80 cal row, 120 wall balls, and it was partitioned any way you want to do it. So I think there's a very clear way which was the fastest time if you discount ability and fitness level. So if you weren't going to fatigue on any of those movements and you can knock out big sets, there's a clear way to put it together to be the fastest time. Of course, most people are limited in how many muscle ups can they do before they fatigue. How many wall balls can they do before they fatigue. So when we look at that workout, I think for most people, it was managing the ring muscle up volume. And it was, excuse me. Sorry, I'm a little sick right now. It's when you're such a highly tuned machine as I am, the tiniest virus can derail everything. It's a curse. So looking at that workout, the ring muscle ups are clearly for a lot of people the limiting factor, and it's not just how many can they physically string together, it's how quickly can they recover from sets. The transition on and off the rower, getting the rower up to speed, makes it that you don't want to do too many transitions. And if you break the rowing down too much, you're just going to be wasting a lot of time there. So looking at the muscle ups, it's okay. If I hit 5 reps, sure, maybe hitting that 5 reps is going to be about 14 to 18 seconds, depending on how tall you are. But how much rest do I need before I can hit that 5 again? For some people, they were better off doing 2s and 3s where they could keep a shorter rest. For some people, they were able to hit bigger sets, maybe 6, 7, 8 reps at a time, and then hit a set of wall balls and come back to the rings and still feel fresh. So it's that kind of a workout really gives you a chance to kind of figure out how good you are at repeating short sets or longer sets, how long it takes you to cycle through reps and transition into them, and ultimately kind of shave down to your best time on that style of workout.
Yeah, and just in terms of, you started to mention it, but if you were just going to do the actual math in terms of how long should, and for everyone just to have an insight into John's recovery process from his disease right now, you can't see the video, but he is in fact drinking Fit Aid, Immunity Aid, which is almost certainly going to reduce the duration of his illness. It's going to be, it's going. Yeah.
I don't know if we can get Life Aid to sponsor the podcast, but this is a tasty beverage. It's supporting me in my recovery from illness and has a blend of echinacea, vitamin A, C, and D, turmeric, magnesium, ginger, and is a tasty treat.
That's right. We'll send this over to Orion, and we'll make sure we get some compensation for promoting the product. So this is going to be great. But anyway, just in terms of the math of a workout like that, right? We think about just 30 muscle ups. How long is that going to take someone? You mentioned briefly just how you might think about that. And so, a good rule of thumb for something like muscle ups is if you are doing them unbroken at, a reasonable clip, but not necessarily super, super fast, it's probably going to take you around 3 to 4 seconds, maybe up to 5 seconds if you're starting to pause on top of the rings per rep. Right. So like how long is 30 muscle ups going to take someone? If you just did 30 muscle ups pretty much unbroken, that's probably going to take someone about 2 minutes. If you look at elite scores on 30 muscle ups for time, most elite athletes are going to do 30 muscle ups in somewhere around 2.5 plus or minus. So that factors in breaking a few times, taking a few breaks, 5 to 10 seconds in length. And then sort of like you mentioned, most people should have an idea of how many muscle ups they can do in some sort of situation, like doing muscle ups, a set of muscle ups every 30 seconds or on the minute. So factoring in rest based upon that. So some quick rep math there in terms of how long 30 muscle ups should take. Then we can do a similar thing for wall balls and say, okay, how long will 120 wall balls take? Well, if you do wall balls unbroken for a minute, most people are going to get right around 30 reps, right? The women actually sometimes have it a little easier on that with the 9-foot target, especially tall women. You can actually get pretty fast on wall balls with that. But about 30 reps per minute is a pretty solid number to use there. So it's like if you just did 120 wall balls unbroken, for most people, that's going to take them right around 4 minutes, right? When we think about rowing calories, we can just use sort of like a baseline guesstimation of pace. So for male athletes who are pretty good, holding a pace of around 20 calories per minute in a CrossFit setting is usually like moving pretty fast, but not necessarily killing yourself, right? So you can think about, okay, well, if you're going to do, wall or rowing at a decent clip, but not dying. That's going to be about 20 calories per minute for male athletes. For female athletes, there's more variation based upon size, I think, right? Because for some women, even who have pretty good capacity in general, they're going to struggle to hold a pace of about 15 calories per minute. Whereas for other women, that's pretty easy. And they're going to be able to keep a pace more in that like 17, 18 calories per minute, and get like a similar RPE to a male athlete, holding about 20 calories per minute. So, you can just sort of do a little bit of math on that. And for a male athlete, it's like, okay, well, that's going to be about 4 minutes of rowing. So you just kind of add that stuff up and say, well, you throw in a few transitions. It's about 4 minutes of wall balls, about 4 minutes of rowing, about 2.5 minutes of muscle ups. And what do you get? You get about 10.5 minutes. And what were the best times on that workout? They were right around 10.5 minutes, right? So you can just sort of gauge like what would someone who is an elite CrossFit athlete be able to do on a workout like this, assuming that they're doing everything basically unbroken. Their transitions are going to take them 5 to 10 seconds a piece, depending on what they're transitioning between. And that at least gives you like, this is theoretically what is possible on a workout. And then from there, you have to adjust based upon your own abilities and how much work you can do without having to stop.
Yeah. And I think it's important there to know which movements have more capacity for change on that pacing. So a wall ball, it's like you can try and force the pace, but you can't make that move a lot quicker. All right. A ring muscle up. Again, you can force the pace a little bit, but it's hard to keep the rings in the right, like swing in the right way, if you try and force the pace too much. And you can work on different techniques to make that happen, but there's only so much faster you can make those go. Something like the rowing obviously is a lot more volatile in the pace, and you can force that a little bit more. So knowing where your abilities lie, and then which movements you have to just kind of cruise through, and which ones you can try and force a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. So, I think a good way to approach that is to just do a little bit of rep math. Like, what would someone who is going to do this basically unbroken and not take more than 5 to 10 seconds between movements, like what would their score be on a workout? And that could be for something that is 5 rounds per time. It could be something that is, a 10-minute AMRAP of a bunch of different stuff. And that basic rep math gives you an idea of like what is theoretically possible in here. And then I think you need to adjust for you and your capacity and just think about, okay, well, what is actually going to happen for me, right? Let's say we make up a different example. Let's do something that's like a 10-minute AMRAP of 15 chest to bar pull-ups, 20 wall balls, and 25 box jumps with a step down, right? And you could do the basic math on that and say, okay, 15 chest to bar pull-ups for someone doing that unbroken, that's going to take them about a second per repetition. 20 wall balls, we can say, all right, that's going to be, somewhere around 45 seconds. And then we can say, okay, 25 box jumps with a step down. People can typically do about 20 to 25 box jumps with a step down in a minute at a reasonable clip, like not necessarily going super, super fast, but not slow. So you can just add up those times, throw in about a 5-second transition between them, and that gives you the math of roughly how many reps someone is going to do. But let's say that you are not, in fact, going to be able to do 15 unbroken chest to bar pull-ups over and over and over again. And for you, you're going to have to split that up 6, 5, 4, and you can still say, well, each of those reps is not going to take much longer than a second, but I know that I probably need to take 5 breaths in between my sets of 6, 5, 4 in order to maintain that pace, right? It's like, okay, well, how long is that going to take you? Each of those transitions is probably going to take you 15-ish seconds, and then over time, that's probably going to slow down to more like 20 seconds, and that can give you an idea of like, okay, this is maybe realistic for me based upon my capacity in these movements. So you have this sort of like, this is what a CrossFit Games athlete would do, which is basically unbroken, quick transitions. And then this is what might be realistic for me by factoring in fractioning up the reps, and adding in additional transitions and rest time in between those sets. And then ideally, you're able to come up with something that's realistic, that's not going to result in you just like completely falling apart, slowing the box jumps way down, and then getting into those super long transitions where you're walking around for, 30, 40 seconds or doing singles on the chest to bar or something like that.
I think what you were saying there about slowing the box jumps down, it's important to calculate in fatigue on these kind of things, because some movements, the actual rep cycle time isn't going to slow as you get tired. So something like a chest to bar pull up, your cycle time per rep is pretty consistent regardless of how tired you are. Your fatigue really just affects the rest in between sets or how much you have to break it up. Something like a box jump with a step down, as you get more tired, that whole cycle is going to slow a little bit. And you may be able to move continuously, but your pace per rep is going to fall. So it's important not to just go linear with your rep cycle time when you're calculating out these workouts.
Yeah, a great example of that is burpees, right? Where those can turn into a disaster. So just like basic idea on pacing burpees, if you're going fast on burpees but not sprinting, depending on the context, if it's, just a normal burpee or a bar facing burpee or a burpee to like a 6-inch target, it's probably going to be about 20 burpees per minute at like a fast clip. 15 burpees per minute for most people is quick and moving steadily without stopping, but not necessarily flying. But I think everyone at some point has had a situation where they're not actually stopping on burpees, but they're doing potentially, 8 burpees in a minute because you're jumping up, shuffling your feet, getting down real slow, stopping briefly on the ground, stepping up, shuffling your feet, jumping again, and it just turns into a slog, right? So there are movements you mentioned like burpees, dumbbell snatches, box jumps, et cetera, where the cycle time on those can get really, really, really slow, even if you're not necessarily stopping on them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's the movements that have more of a set cycle time where you can't force the pace are the ones that are going to stay more consistent, whether you're fatigued or not. So, burpees, something you can force the pace on. Yeah, that's something that's going to die away as you get tired. Muscle up, something which is fairly set, is going to stay pretty consistent. If you're on the rings, your pace is going to be pretty consistent.
Yeah, totally. So what do you think about pacing barbell stuff, right? Because I mean, it same idea that you're talking about with chest to bar or something like that, where the cycle time on doing, a squat clean or a deadlift or, a shoulder to overhead or something isn't going to change that much, but the amount of fatigue that you're experiencing and the amount of rest that you're going to need is potentially going to change a lot. So how do you think about calculating, how long a barbell piece should take someone, or what's realistic for someone to hit repeated sets of heavyish squat cleans?
I think part of that comes down to the ability to string reps together. So for someone to take like a squat clean, if they can do touch and go reps, or if they have to do singles at the weight that's being used. So if it's touch and go reps, that cycle time tends to be a little more consistent. If it's singles, it's about what time do you need to reset if you were to go as soon as you could after dropping the bar, and then calculating in what you need to rest. So if we, again, look at an open workout, the clean and jerk workout from this year. So with the lighter barbell, most people on the first bar were going touch and go for those reps. And yes, you can force the pace there, but it's more of a consistent pace. When you get to, say, the third or fourth barbell where you're doing singles, it's can you hit a rep every 5 seconds? Now, every 5 seconds on singles isn't much for a rest. It's more of a drop the bar, let the bar settle on the ground, get in position and pull. If we're doing a rep every 10 seconds, that starts to get a little more rest in there. And for some people, 10 to 12 seconds is kind of that sweet spot to repeat a weight that's maybe in the, I would say 80 to 85% range of max. Of something you could repeat for several reps on that. And then you look at some people on that top barbell weight who were maybe doing a rep every 30 seconds or every 40 seconds just to try and get through it because it's such a high percentage of their max. And I think when it comes to barbell, like I say, it comes down to if you're doing singles. And if you're resetting every rep, it's how much rest you actually need and how much rest do you take. Because people will rest longer than they need. Like the idea that you're going to magically recover with an extra 5 seconds rest it's more mental than it is physical. And needing that time to kind of refocus and reset from a mental standpoint is fine, but understand that the change isn't really happening on a physical level there in that time.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And the fact that just understanding that you potentially can hit the lift again, even though you don't feel good, is an important aspect of training. And I will at least partially dispute that because I think some people are just like, they're destroyed and they can't go again. But that for people who are not at that stage, that just really understanding like, I feel like my grip is blown up. I feel like my quads are shot. I feel like I'm going to miss this lift. And if you just try it anyway, that you might just hit it, is an important aspect of like battery training, right? That we've talked about in some previous podcasts. And you also mentioned just like the cadence of, how often you can go in terms of hitting a clean and jerk at a reasonable percentage of your max, or a snatch, or, thrusters or whatever. And that's one of the most important things for understanding how to pace barbell based pieces, especially once they start to get above the sort of lightweight barbell cycling types of situations, is you should have an idea of, okay, at this 185 pound barbell for squat cleans, is this something that I think I should be hitting once every 5 seconds? This is something I think I should be hitting once every 7 seconds. Is this something I think I should be hitting once every 15 seconds? That people who are very good and have a really good understanding of their own capacity will intuitively fall into a rhythm where if you just watch the time from when they start a rep to the time that they start the next one, it's pretty much on a cadence. It's like, yep, every 15 seconds, Pat Vellner's hitting another rep. Okay, the barbell's a little heavier. Now it's every 20 seconds. Okay, the barbell's a little heavier. Now it's every 25 seconds, right? And that they may not even be watching the clock, although I do think that some of them are watching and sort of counting. But they just sort of know, okay, time to go again. Not ready, not ready. Okay, time to go again. And that the process of training through different scenarios, whether that's actually setting an interval like that or just doing a bunch of different stuff and sort of learning your capacity, does give people the ability to find that rhythm and be able to just like hit those barbell lifts over and over and over again on a specific cadence.
Yeah, and I think that intuitive understanding is just something that is developed from training. And the more you do it, the more you understand what works and what doesn't work. And obviously you can improve that ability through training as well. But even just understanding and not improving it is going to help improve your performance.
What do you think about stuff that is in fact a little bit lighter, that is able, that people are able to do more barbell cycling with? I certainly find that more difficult to do rep math on, right? Because the fatigue of doing whatever repeated touch and go 135 or 95 pound squat cleans tends to accumulate pretty rapidly for people. So I find it a bit trickier to say, oh, well, this rep is only going to take someone 2 to 3 seconds to do. But, if they do all those reps touch and go, they're going to be just crushed. How do you think about just like guesstimating how long things like that are going to take?
I tend to look at it as sets within that. So let's say they have to do 10 squat cleans at 135 or 95. First thing is, okay, can they do that unbroken? If yes, what is their cycle time on that rep going to be? And maybe if they're just doing unbroken for 10, they're going to hit, what would that be? Like maybe that's going to be about 22 to 30 seconds, depending on the person. Can they hit that unbroken? Great. Do they have to repeat that same set again later? So, okay, if they're doing it unbroken, that cycle time is maybe going to drop a couple of seconds across that set of 10, but it's going to be pretty similar. If they have to do 2 sets of 5, maybe they can hold that same cycle pace they were doing, but we have to add 10 seconds in for the rest that's going in between the sets. So I think it's a lot down to the individual at that point, and how long they can hang on to the bar. But the cycle time per rep will stay pretty consistent until you have to break it down and add in rest once they're stringing it together.
Yeah, that's a smart way to do it, just to calculate, okay, they're going to do this many, and then they're going to rest this long in between. Or depending on the context, right, even if it is squat cleans at 135, 95, for someone who can do that unbroken in a lot of different contexts, it might be a workout where the strategy makes sense for them to do it as singles. And they can say, okay, they should be able to cycle those as singles at 1 rep every 5 seconds, because the next thing they have to do is, let's say, a bunch of muscle ups or something that's kind of challenging. And it's like, yeah, you could do touch and go on that, but it's probably going to be a bad idea because you want to pace it relative to the next movement that's coming up.
Yep. Yeah. And I think going back to that training aspect and knowing what you're capable of, and knowing when a workout comes up, it's like, okay, can I do this? Can I hit these touch and go? Is that going to give me a better overall time than doing singles? If I hit 10 touch and go cleans and it takes me 30 seconds, is that going to be better for me than doing 10 singles, which maybe takes me 45 seconds? Am I going to need to rest an extra 15 seconds somewhere in the workout because of that? Or is my cycle time going to slow down on the second round of this because of that? And just understanding the cumulative time across the workout for those movements.
Yeah, totally.
It's the same.
You didn't really talk. Go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say, it's the same as rowing. When you see someone rowing at let's say a guy rowing a 1500 cal pace, compared to a guy rowing a 1300 cal pace, it's like over a 20 cal row, that's going to maybe be about 5 seconds quicker, give or take. Does that 5 seconds actually equate to being 5 seconds quicker, or does it mean they need to rest 5 seconds more before they start whatever is after the rower?
Right.
And, looking at someone like Jackie, the fastest person off the rower isn't necessarily going to win the workout, because they might need to rest more. They might need to put the bar down and thrust them. They might slow their transition time, whatever it is.
Yeah, totally. And that's a really good point on the cyclical stuff, that there's marginal benefit to going faster than is sustainable for you, right? Because the extra few seconds from that increased pace very quickly become more seconds of rest or more seconds of transition time. And actually, that was what I was going to ask you when I was rudely interrupting. Was how do you think about giving people cyclical paces or understanding what cyclical pace someone should be hitting in a workout that does have rowing or assault bike or ski or running or something like that, right? Something like Helen, which 3 rounds for time of a 400 meter run, kettlebell swing and pull up, or something that might just be like repeated sets of 10 assault bike, or what was that open workout? 19 row calories, 19 wall balls for 15 minutes, right? I mean, something like that. People should have an idea because there's a number on the screen of the pace that they want to go, but they don't always know what's realistic for them. So how should they think about that?
Yeah, again, that's just coming down to training and repetition of knowing what you're capable of. In your training, if you haven't done kind of row intervals and varying distances and paces just on cyclical work, so just rowing, not combined with other movements, it's hard to know what you're capable of and then what you can replicate in a workout. So I think running is probably the hardest one there because it's very hard to gauge pace mid-run. It's one of those things that you don't really, well, I would say the majority of CrossFitters don't really know what pace they're going until they get back in the gym and see the clock. But on a row or a bike, you have that constant feedback of numbers, and you should know what you can sustain for different time periods and different distances. So if I was to give someone a 2-minute assault bike on the understanding it was a max effort, that's obviously going to be a different pace to a 2-minute assault bike when they have to go right into something afterwards. So it's essentially just practice in training and understanding what your paces are, trying to push those limits sometimes. So if I know I can hold a 1600 cal pace for 20 cals, can I then hold a 1650? Is that pushing the limit too much? Can I hold a 1500 pace for 25 cals? Can I hold a 1500 pace for 30 cals? And kind of testing the boundaries of it and understanding where your body starts to break down, where your breathing is breaking down, where you just can't recover between movements.
Yeah, I think that just having a bunch of different training scenarios is one of the best ways to really dial that in. In terms of just some baseline recommendations for people, if you don't know what some cyclical benchmark scores are for you, that's a really good way to at least gauge where you roughly should be, right? So on the row, if you don't know what your 2K time is and you don't know what your 5K time is, or like a pace that you could hold for a 30-minute row is, like those are really good numbers to have an idea of, right? Same thing with the assault bike. If you don't know your 10-minute assault bike test or like a 30-minute assault bike test, then you should probably just do that even though it sucks, because that gives you a pretty solid range, right? So for most people in doing CrossFit type activities, meaning, rowing and doing burpees and wall balls or something mashed together, you're going to want to go slower than your 2K pace, because most people are going to be able to sustain effort in an only cyclical scenario at a higher pace because the blood flow demands are much less and they're not necessarily running into that sort of like local muscle endurance fatigue that you have to watch out for in CrossFit scenarios, right? People who are really good at CrossFit are going to be able to maintain a higher percentage of their 2K pace in CrossFit scenarios. But for most people, it's going to be a little bit slower. So let's say that you're a male athlete who can row a 7-minute 2K, which is a 1:45 pace. Then in most CrossFit scenarios, meaning like a certain number of row calories, then some other stuff, or like 500 meter rows with some other stuff thrown in between them, 145 is a good pace for you for a 2K. So you should probably be shooting for something in like the 147 to 151 pace in a lot of like quote unquote CrossFit scenarios. Similarly on the assault bike, say you're, we'll just use like a solid benchmark of 200 calories in 10 minutes, which is going to be sustaining a pace of somewhere around 72 RPM throughout the 10 minutes. Well, in that case, okay, you're going to want to back off from 72 RPM in most CrossFit scenarios. So you're probably going to be shooting for somewhere like 68 to 70 RPM, depending on what movements you're paired with and how long the effort is. And they can sort of use the 30-minute pace as like a lower tier pace to shoot for if you're doing something hard, as like, okay, I shouldn't really have to drop below this unless I'm completely cooked, right? So let's say you have someone who can do 72 RPM for 10 minutes. And it's like, all right, you want to back off a little bit from that for assault bike scenarios and CrossFit workouts, and they can hold 63 RPM for 30 minutes. And it's like, okay, you should probably be able to go 63 RPM kind of no matter what you're doing from a CrossFit perspective, right? And different athletes are going to have slightly different characteristics, but that's at least like some good rules of thumb if you're not really sure where to start in terms of pacing those different scenarios.
Yeah. And like we keep coming back to, knowing what you can handle, what your body can handle, is the most important part of that.
And just, you actually have to pay attention to it when you're training too.
Yeah.
Right. That like the monitor is in front of you. So you'd better be actually looking at what is your RPM and what did I start at? Was I able to sustain it? I wasn't at all. Okay. I tried to go 68 RPM and by the end I'm barely holding 58. Like, okay, don't go 68 next time.
Yeah.
Like, let's back off a little bit. And over time you should be able to kind of like, zero in on what is actually sustainable for you. And you know what I actually think one of the barriers is for people is that they think that if they're not putting forth a huge amount of effort in each training session, that they are sort of like leaving something on the table. And that in reality, they're going to have better results by potentially going slower in a training session in order to learn their pace, so that once they know their pace, they can then try to increase that in their next session. So it's better to go slow, learn that it's sustainable, and then increase that up rather than just like every single time go too fast and die.
Yeah. Yep. I think that's right.
Cool. What else, John? Any other pacing or rep math calculation stuff you think the people should know?
I think if you're pacing and you think you might come out too hot, especially on like an assault bike sprint or something like that, make sure you video it so other people can see, because usually that tends to be the most hilarious outcomes. Don't just die quietly in the corner. Make sure everyone can see it.
My favorite assault bike videoing story is John Zvenix, who is a client of James Fitzgerald, and he would just like film everything he did and send it to James as sort of like a joke. So James programmed a 30-minute assault bike recovery ride at just like, heart rate zone 1. And so John just set up the camera, filmed all 30 minutes of his ride, and was like, "Coach, any notes on this? Am I doing this right?" Less funny than people dying, I suppose.
True.
Thanks for listening. While you're here, go ahead and head over to your podcast player, subscribe to the show, give it a rating, give it a review, all that good stuff. You can also go ahead and click through to the show notes where you can find out more about us at legionsc.com, and also follow us on Instagram at legion.sc.